we have Melissa Carver and then Jess Schmidt. Jess, I see you there. Audio's good. Mic's good.
Either one.
Huh?
Jess, can you hear me now? No, I don't think she can.
Oh, my is muted. Just like excited.
Jess, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can.
All right, perfect. Okay. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our two candidates for secretary. First off, quick introduction. My name is Rory Britt. I am one of our judiciary co-chairs on the elections committee. I also serve as the co-chair of our SOC committee. I'm a senior and incredibly excited to see our candidates. So first off, we have Melissa Carver. Melissa Carver is a sophomore accounting major from North Carolina. She's been in student government since her freshman year and is in her first semester as the Public Relations Committee co-chair. She also serves as a member of the Student Budget Advisory Committee, or SBAC. And then we have Jess Schmidt. Jess is a junior communications major from Pennsylvania. She joined student government as a sophomore after spending her freshman year as the student government beat reporter for the Old Gold and Black. She is the former public relations co-chair of the student government, a position which she held for 3 semesters before studying abroad, where she is now. Kind of a round of applause for our candidates. So what we're going to do is just have each of you give an opening statement. We're going to have Jess go first and then Melissa. So Jess, whenever you're ready.
Well, hi everyone. I'm so thankful and so excited to be here, and I'm really excited to kind of talk about my platform for student government secretary and tell you a little bit about why I'm running and what I'm running for. So first, I come to this position with the full understanding of the weight this past year. We've dealt with a lot of challenges. There's been a lot of frustration. There's been a lot of confusion. It's been a heavy year, but we've also had a lot of important conversations on campus this year. Conversations that have brought groups of students together and really created important opportunities for meaningful change. Now more than ever, the student body of Wake Forest needs an executive who will serve them passionately as a committed resource, who will be transparent and trustworthy, and who will bring a sense of home, community, and inclusion to campus. They need a secretary who will be accessible, who will keep them in the know on what is happening, and who will bring community and bridge gaps. As the PR co-chair for the past 2 years, I've heard the concerns that have been raised about mental health, about academic services, sexual assault, and inclusion. In this role, I've helped provide answers in confusing times of university policy, advise campus offices of the UCC and the class office on how to best connect and aid students, and create new campaigns that have brought awareness to academic resources on campus, in addition to increasing social media outreach to prove to students that they have a student government who cares and is working for them and for their interests. As secretary, I believe we must continue to show students that we are prioritizing them by connecting them with via in-person events. We must also promote dialogue and conversations with the student body on what's going on and how we can help. I believe it's also time to prioritize student safety and inclusion on campus, and further work on initiatives that seek to do this, such as the Campus Climate Survey. In all of these areas, I know I can be the secretary that students are looking for, and the advocate who's not shy about voicing student concerns and putting them first. It's time to create a better Wake Forest for all students, and that starts with electing me as secretary. Thank you.
I just want to start by giving you all another rundown of who I am and just getting to know me on a more personal level. So I'm Melissa Carver. I'm from Roxborough, North Carolina. I'm an accounting major with a psychology minor. And this past semester, I've had the privilege of serving on the PR team as the committee co-chair with Janine Lynch. And I have enjoyed every minute I've gotten to work alongside several other committees since being elected to student government my freshman year. And I've gotten to plan events, communicate with constituents and executive teams and admin, and also just notifying people of changes and initiatives that we are taking priority in student government. Also, as Roy mentioned, I am on SBAC. So that's allowed me to get involved not only through a student government lens, but just getting to see these organizations that have an effect on students outside of student government and seeing where their budgetary needs fall. I also am a student advisor, so I get to work with existing and new incoming students, which has been an amazing experience getting to allow these kids to know, or new students to know, what resources are available to them and how they can use those resources to make their time away as great as mine has been because of my knowledge of those resources. So I hope you will consider all of these traits and all that if you vote for me for secretary. Thank you guys so much.
Awesome. Well, first off, we're going to hop into our first question, which is how do you define the role of secretary and how will you fulfill those expectations? So we're going to start with Melissa and then we're going to go to Jess after that.
So I would define the role of secretary as the communicator and the facilitator for constituents and for the executive team, senators, and cabinet. It would be my job, if elected, to communicate new things that came about in student government meetings, making sure that the website is properly updated. Currently, that falls under public relations, but I would like to take a more active role in that because it's kind of hard to put the whole website under two people who have other things going on at once. I know because that's something I'm currently having to do with my co-chair, Jenny Lynch. So taking a more active role in facilitating these conversations of change and what we're working on to make sure that all students are aware of things that are going on in campus and going on campus and in student government, and making it a more open dialogue between admin, faculty, staff, and students.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think the secretary role is particularly unique in that it's a little bit less defined than the president or the speaker, or even treasurer, of course. Secretary is a really unique opportunity to take on as much responsibility as they want, and as little. So I think in this role, obviously the secretary is super important in communication and organizational aspects, both internal and external within student government. But I think it also has a unique opportunity, especially this year, and especially as we've kind of seen this past couple of years, where there's been so much going on campus. The president can only handle certain things, their schedule's booked all the time. And so secretary really is an opportunity to kind of step up, to start being in these meetings, start holding these meetings on their own. If I were to be elected secretary, I'd really like to kind of start by being this connector, this person where students and the student body are able to come and talk to me, talk to the secretary about what's going on, what their concerns are, be that person for them, that resource for them, but also do that internally as well. I think there's a lot of encouragement that we can encourage leadership among younger student government senators who might not be co-chairs, who might be fresh to student government, but they need kind of that leadership and that guidance. And I think that's something that the secretary role can help provide by being that internal motivator to be that person who is communicating both externally to student government, but also internally. I think this kind of means also sitting on meetings. I think it means starting initiatives, creating legislation. I think it can be as active as you want it. And I think that's something where I really seek to kind of transform this role and really take on more responsibilities by helping the executive be more effective at what they're doing, aiding them, but also starting new initiatives, really working to make sure the secretary role is being that person the students can come to and really trust. And I think that's kind of the most important part of the role that I'd like to take forward.
Awesome. Our next question is that the secretary holds an important role in being a significant conduit between the cabinet and the Senate, as well as the Senate and the entire student body. With that in mind, what do you think student government needs to do to increase transparency with the broader community? We're going to start with Melissa again.
So I think transparency has been a real issue for everyone. And like I've mentioned before in my campaign platform, I think transparency and issues with communication all stem from a lack of understanding, which creates a lack of empathy. So the first start with increasing transparency for me is growing relationships with existing resources such as the UCC, the BSA, and other minority groups to help increase communications that we can put out for them on our behalf, because we have a different reach than they do and they have a different reach than we do. So strengthening our connections with those groups so we can further publicize initiatives that we're doing, and also so we have connecting links when, for example, the fertilizer plant fire. I was in charge of running the DMs and responding to constituent concerns. And that was a really hard thing because a lot of people were getting their information from Yik Yak, sadly, and that's kind of hard to combat as an elected official. And so making sure we have clear, concise information on Instagram at all times was very important, and I'd like to continue that if I was elected. That's why we adopted the initiative of This Week in Senate, and we've been posting those on Instagram just to keep that transparency of what's going on and how you can ask questions and the constituent concerns form, and just continuing to make those available and accessible to students in every way, shape, or form, whether that's an email list with the minutes, which I would love to undertake so that students, if they can't make it to Senate to watch the debate or to watch a regular Senate meeting or legislation, they have all of that where they can access it from their email and they can save it whatever they would like.
Awesome. Jess?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways. Transparency is obviously something that's hugely important in the secretary role. Something that I think we've tried to build over the past couple of years. In PR, being PR co-chair, I've worked with increasing social media outreach, creating inboxes where people can drop constituent concerns, have been able to communicate with student government via social media. But obviously not everyone has social media. Not everyone is going to be utilizing and accessing our resources via that platform. So kind of with this foundation established, I'd really like to move to more in-person connections with the student body. It's great to see someone online, see what they're doing, see how they're working, but I think having that face-to-face connection is super important. Some ways that I kind of see this working is kind of through events where we're able to put senators in front of the pit or in front of Benson. They're able to just talk with people who come by. People can ask them questions in person. They can connect with them on a deeper and more personal level. I think one of the things that student government struggles with, especially right now, is that people don't know who their senators are. They don't know what we do. They don't know that we control dining, that we can help with academic resources, all of these different things. I think there's just a lack of understanding. So creating opportunities where students can directly meet and engage with their representatives is how we're really going to best represent student voices. I also think another key kind of role that the secretary can take on is through meeting with organizational leaders and heads. This was started this year under the current Secretary Keith. She started meeting with OGB editor. This kind of facilitated a really good transparency between this organization and student government, what's going on, how are we helping. But I think this can be translated to all different campus organizations. I think that can transfer to Greek Life, APO, to BSA, multicultural societies, all sorts of organizations I think should have some sort of connection point within student government where they're directly able to voice their concerns and express them that way. I also think using our Senate time as a meeting where students outside of the student government can come and talk to us before Senate, after Senate, but also the students within student government. Again, as I mentioned before, I think a lot of senators feel a little bit overwhelmed. They're not co-chairs maybe yet, but they don't really know how to get involved or be leaders. So providing opportunities and people such as the secretary position who they can come and talk to and feel trusted and feel safe with, I think is going to be a really good way to kind of encourage that transparency within the organization. I know when I wasn't a co-chair, I didn't really know what the executive branch was up to all the time or cabinet. So I think making that more smooth of a process of communication internally will make us function a lot better as an organization and really help us serve our students better, which is obviously the ultimate priority.
Fantastic, thank you guys. So our next question is, what is a common misconception about student government that you would like to push back on? Jess, I'm gonna have you go first for this.
Yeah, so this was mentioned a little bit earlier, but when I started in student government, I was first the OGB beat reporter. In this role, I attended each meeting, I went to all the senates, and I interviewed people about what was happening, so I could write these summaries for the newspaper. However, I felt like it was very bureaucratic, very complex. I didn't feel very included in the process. And I think that's something that a lot of people have that preconceived conception today. People don't really understand who we are, what we do. They think it's very bureaucratic, that we don't have much control over things, that we're a toy of the administration. I think all of these different things, we've proven that's not true. I think this year alone, when all of the sexual assault kind of things came out in the fall, obviously it's not a new issue, but it's an issue that was finally more brought to light in a more public way than I think we've talked about before in Wake Forest history. So in this way, we were able to, as student government, through communication efforts, largely in the PR team, and also through exec by having meetings, by talking with administrators and connecting with survivors as well, we were able to push the administration into creating this campus climate survey that really does have the potential to change a lot of things for us on campus. So I think this is one of those examples where student government does have a lot of power. We're able to represent student voices, we're able to put student concerns and interests first. But I think that starts with this transparency, this trust, and also being accessible. The students aren't going to come to us if they think we're not going to be inclusive to them, or we're not going to be able to meet with them. If we can't get time on our calendars to actually meet with them and set the time. So in all of these ways, I think that's where our reputation kind of comes from. It's from being too bureaucratic, too inaccessible. We need to kind of counter that by showing that we can help them. We have resources and connections with administrators that can help them. And that we're willing to put that out there. We're willing to connect with them and really represent them as their student representatives.
I think kind of the misconception stems from power and what exactly student government is able to do. I know before I was on student government, I kind of thought it was like high school, but a little bit bigger in the sense of, you talked with admin every now and then, but you really had no chance to make real change. But I quickly realized that that's not the case, and we have relationships as cabinet, executive team, senators to just have these discussions with admin. I know executive team, they have a monthly meeting with President Wente, and that's a great time for us to voice concerns. And that's why we want our constituents to come with us with concerns. And I think it's also a common misconception that we're not here for the students, we're here for us. Sometimes I feel like sometimes students are like, oh, what are you gonna do for me? Well, we're here for you. We're here for the student body. We want to support you, and we're all about making your voices heard. I want to amplify those voices that would otherwise go unheard, because I feel like it's hard sometimes, because as students in such a large body, I came from a super small high school. I knew everybody in my graduating class by name. And sometimes moving to this big fish or little fish, big pond type of analogy, it's hard because you don't feel heard as much as you did if you came from a smaller place, or even if you came from a bigger place. It's a completely different experience coming to college and not really knowing what's going on sometimes, and just feeling like you're just like a fish out of water. So having students know we're here for you. Like, we want to voice your opinions and your concerns to the people it matters to, because it does matter to admin, and they want to hear your voices because they care about you and we care about you.
Fantastic. Our last sort of pre-written question is, what do you believe that's not written, right? What do you believe is the most challenging part of being the student government secretary, and how would you address that difficulty? So again, we're going to start with Jess.
Yeah, I think the most challenging kind of aspect of it is, I think, the stereotype of being the secretary. I think it's a lot about minutes. It's a lot about kind of taking notes, things like that. And I think too often the position gets narrowed down to that very small definition. Obviously, those are very important jobs of the role. I think it's essential to having a smooth process, smooth internal organization, clearly. But I also think the secretary has so much more potential for the role. There's so much more capabilities in the meetings with administration. How can they kind of work to represent student interests? How can they kind of take on more responsibility by being more accessible to students and being that communicator, that facilitator that the role possesses, but isn't always necessarily used in a broader sense. So I think kind of eliminating that is really just taking on challenges. I think another key part of the secretary role is about being helpful, whether that's to cabinet, but also just to the student government senators in general. So I think it's about kind of taking on responsibility. It's about being initiative, and really just trying to aid each person in whatever way is capable. By working on projects, by kind of getting involved in different committees. That's something that I love most about being on the PR committee, was really being able to work with academic, work with campus life, work with judiciary, really kind of branch and step into multiple different zones. And I think that's kind of where the secretary role can kind of expand in the future. I think they can be someone that's very accessible, someone that people trust, and someone that people can go to kind of express their concerns. So yeah, I think that's kind of the most important part, is kind of, we get limited, I think, by that stereotypical image of what we have of them. But I think they have limitless possibilities to kind of really enact change, to really be a powerful figure on campus, to express student voices, to amplify student voices, and really be that advocate. That's not just limited to the president or to the speaker. And I think that's something that I can definitely embody as a secretary.
I think probably the most difficult thing is realizing that each relationship you would have as secretary is different. A relationship as secretary for senators and a secretary looks completely different. You're holding them accountable for making sure they attend things and making sure they're going to committee and going to senates and in class when they say they're in class and going to their extracurriculars. And then your role as a secretary is completely different when you have a student come to your office. And I think embodying that and realizing those differences and how you carry yourself in those relationships and understanding that everyone's needs are different from you is probably the biggest challenge. I think that's probably the biggest challenge in any relationship we would have inside or outside of student government, is realizing where you fall in those lines and how you can best serve. I think it's, while difficult, it definitely can be done by analyzing, the room and making sure, okay, like, what does this person need from me? It's a great question that me and one of the fellow co-chairs ask one another. What do you need? Do you need a listening ear? Do you need me to give you advice? Do you need me to give you encouragement? What do you need from me, and how can I best serve you? And I think that's one of the hardest things to do, is to step back sometimes and stop talking and realizing that sometimes someone just needs you to listen, and realizing that that role may look different in every single relationship.
Fantastic. Thank you both. So now we're going to move into the audience portion of this. Just a little bit of a refresher. Because y'all are competing against each other, you will have an opportunity for the audience to ask some questions, whether in person or moderated by Brooke on the Instagram. And then as to the number of questions we'll ask, we'll kind of see how time works with that. But for our two candidates who are running unopposed, we're not going to have the audience section, just again for brevity, so we're not all here until 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. So with that, do we want to start with the Instagram or go with person and see? All right, is there anyone here in the audience who has a question for either or both of our candidates? Going one? Yes.
How do you differentiate yourself between each other? I mean, you seem to agree on a lot of common points, but are there particular policies you disagree with, or what makes you the better secretary?
Let's have Melissa go first and then have Jess go.
Yeah, of course. I covered this a little bit in my platforms and promises. You can view my Instagram and kind of talk about this. So one of my things that I pride myself on is coming from a different background. And I know each and every one of you brings a different background to the table. All of the candidates are different and unique, and I think that's what makes all of us so special. But I grew up in a strong agricultural town. Both of my grandparents are farmers. I grew up on a farm. I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty on and off the farm, technically speaking. So I have served in many different ways. I've volunteered on campus at the Waker Space, and that's been one of the ways I've gotten my hands dirty. I've helped students in a different perspective with, vinyl cutting and, the laser cutter and different things for school projects. So I not only want to take on student government secretary if elected as a just in the office type of thing, like I want to go out and actually help and like be there, whether that's in a Waker Space 5, if we have like an event there, because that's something that we've started taking on this year, is collaborating more with the Waker Space, which has been a great time, and it's a great time to interact with students and have conversations that you probably otherwise wouldn't have if you had office hours and just opened your door. So interacting with those students, getting my hands dirty inside and outside of student government, and making sure I know my constituents as well as possible.
Jess?
Yeah, I think it all kind of comes down to background. I think it comes down to experience as well. I think it comes down to personality as well. I think we are very similar in PR backgrounds. Working in those roles, I think that I've been able to kind of be there a little bit longer. I think that's something where I've kind of been able to create new initiatives, create more relationships with administrators. It's really allowed me to kind of touch different avenues of campus. Also involved in student advisors, also involved in tutoring, different volunteering, Greek life. I think all of these elements have really allowed me to have a finger in different pulses on campus. But it really allowed me to kind of connect with people from different groups. And I think that comes from working with the class office, working with the UCC, working with all different kind of personalities on campus. And I think that's really allowed me to kind of have a sense of like what is going on campus, what are different students looking for, how are different students differing, and what their interests are. I also think from a personality kind of standpoint, I have a deep interest in kind of advocating for students and student concerns. Mental health, I've had personal experience with that. I've had friends kind of experiencing with that, and I think that is something that's so prevalent and something so important on campus, is have good mental health and make sure that having the university is supporting that. So for me, that kind of comes from a passion and an interest that I have to really further those services. Similarly, Title IX concerns, I think that's something where I also have a deep kind of passion and like a social justice kind of manner. It's something that I really want to work to improve on campus, make sure people feel safe. I think that's instrumental and fundamental to all different levels of campus. It's something that I have a passion for. And when I have a passion for something, I think that really allows me to put in all the work and put in all the effort. I was like that way as the PR co-chair. I kind of transformed Instagram to kind of be more accessible, be more usable by students. Because I was passionate about it and really enjoyed the work in and willing to really dive deep into all the things that involve students. And I think that's kind of where my foundation comes from.
Fantastic. Thank you both. I'm just gonna say, yeah, we can hop into one more question if we have it. Brooke, do we have anything on the Instagram?
Yeah, this is Jess, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay.
Can hear.
Okay. So the question is, you both focus heavily on making connections and reaching students. How will you reach students that fall outside of your typical social circles or involvements?
Yeah, absolutely. I think WAKE has a little bit of a difficulty of being a little too small and a little too easy to stay within your groups. I think that's something that a tendency that all of us have, and something that I definitely have been working to break out of, I think, since being at WAKE. I'm very open to forming new connections. I enjoy setting up new meetings with different people, getting to know people, where they come from and what their background is. I think is just a good characteristic of being well-rounded and being well understood. In student government, I think that's one of the things that I've liked most about student government, is that it's really allowed me to touch different people on different campus, work with different groups. Where do they come from? What are their interests? What are they passionate about? Student government in itself, I would say, is also pretty diverse from that background, where people come from different interests. They have different things going on that people may not see on the front. So I think that's kind of where it's about intentionality, I think, is what it comes down to. It's about really wanting to make connections that are inside your circle. It's about branching out. It's about setting up opportunities that allow you to be in front of people and really be in front of people and be willing to answer questions, being willing to be put on the spot, and really kind of branching and bridging between groups on campus. And that's something that I'm passionate about, something that I think is successful to be a leader. I think you have to have voices from all different backgrounds, all different inputs. I don't think it's possible to be successful otherwise. I think you need to rely on everyone in your community and all the skills and backgrounds people provide. And it's all about kind of creating avenues and opportunities where that is possible. And I think if that is allowed to happen, I think you can learn a lot. I think you can gain a lot too, and really just kind of build a better community. And that's something that I've benefited from so far. I think is something that I think can definitely be improved.
Yeah, so I think I have tried my hardest, coming from a diverse high school and background, to diversify my friend groups and make sure that I don't, because I think, like Jess said, it's very easy to get stuck in your friend group and not leave your friend group once you make those great friends. So to start with my housing over the summer, I actually live with, it's 9 of us total, and each and every single one of us is very different and unique and involved in different things. My roommate's in ROTC. One of my suite mates was on the rowing team. 2 of us are involved in student government. The others are in campus ministries. And then keeping myself involved outside of the suite, so making sure I'm still friends with, other people that are, in PAD and Catholic community and other smaller groups, and continuing those relationships. And, it's really hard to be stuck in your ways sometimes, and making those connections and making sure that they last, and putting the effort in, and making sure that everything is effortful and you put intention into every single relationship, and making sure you diversify your perspective, and to just continue that for the 4 years that you're here.
All right, fantastic. With that, we are going to move into closing statements. So we'll have Jess give your closing statement, and then Melissa, your closing statement. Or you also have the opportunity, if you'd like, to ask your opposing candidate a question.
Yeah, so I kind of started this debate by just kind of reflecting back on what's happened in this past year. But now I really like to focus on what's upcoming. We're in the midst of a campus climate survey that has the potential to provide concrete information on the climate of sexual assault on campus and enact policy change. Having a skilled communicator with experiences who can navigate these difficult conversations and to contribute to policy change is going to be essential. We face the second year of a new university president and administration, where putting student interests on the agenda remains a top priority. Having a secretary who prioritizes transparency and who is committed to the continuation and establishment of relationships with the university administration will ensure that students are being put first, as they should be. Access to mental health services is still not equitable across campus. The UCC still faces high turnover rates and really struggles to keep up in times of critical need. We need a secretary who listens to these student concerns and who worked tirelessly with the UCC through meetings, through outreach, to increase services and really be the support it needs to be for students. too many students still don't know who the representatives are and the different ways the student government can work on their behalf. Having a secretary who creates these opportunities to directly connect with students will be vital, whether that's inside Senate meetings and also outside, again, through intentionality. In all of these ways and many more, I think this year will be one of change, challenge, and opportunity. And having a secretary who's passionate, committed, and experienced to put student needs and interests first is essential. I hope you'll see that that's me. I hope you'll see that I'm committed to this, that I'm excited about it, and that I have these ideas where student government can go and how we can best aid students. And I hope you'll consider voting for me on Tuesday, and thank you again for this opportunity to talk about my platform a little bit further.
Thank you. So just again, to cover the 3 aspects of my platform: increasing transparency, growing awareness of campus resources, and increasing awareness of student government. I've had the privilege of having someone fight for me, and I'm ready to fight for the student body. I've had access to these resources, and I've used these resources in a capacity that most students will probably use them at some point. And I luckily had my mother's involved in a university system, not Wake Forest, but she knows how it works, and she fought for me to get the mental health care that I needed through the UCC, and she knew my rights. So I know that those services are unequitable, and we have a time for change in all aspects. This is the first year we've lived through a pandemic. 2 years now we've gone through a pandemic. Monday is the first time that some students will walk into a college classroom without masks and see their classmates and their professors' faces. Some will not, some will, whatever they please to do. And we're also living in a time where there's a lot of lack of understanding on both parts, admin and students. They didn't live through a pandemic during their college years. We're not having to be administration during a pandemic. There's a lot of lack of understanding, and that comes down to a lack of empathy. So as secretary, I want to increase that understanding so that we can empathize with one another and increase relationships that are already existing, and making sure that, like I said before, your voices are heard, because your voices are important and they need to be raised to a point where admin, all the way up to Wendy, can hear. And she does hear sometimes, and she tries her best, and we appreciate that effortful intention that she's putting into her actions as our president. But I would like to continue to raise those voices, raise awareness, and grow awareness of student government, because everyone deserves a fighting chance, and I would like the privilege to fight for you. So if you would like to give me the privilege to fight for you, I would really appreciate your vote on Tuesday. Thank you.
Well, thank you both, and we just have a round of applause for that. So next, we are going to have our treasurer. So, Tim. Congratulations on your hard ball. So first off, Tim Erday is a junior finance major from Summit, New Jersey. Tim has been in student government since his freshman year and is a member of the Fiscal Planning Committee and currently serves as the Speaker pro tempore. He has also served as a member of the Student Budget Advisory Committee, or SBAC. With that, round of applause for Tim. Please feel free to give your opening statement.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tim Erday, and I'm running to be your treasurer in the coming year. As Rory mentioned, I'm a current sophomore majoring in finance with a minor in philosophy, and I've had the privilege to serve on student government for the past 2 years. Currently, I am the Speaker pro tempore of the Senate and a member of the Fiscal Planning Committee. Additionally, I've had the opportunity to serve on both the Student Budget Advisory Committee and the Student Activity Fee Fund, where I've worked with a variety of organizations throughout their funding processes. I'm sure I'll get a chance to talk about all of this in more detail further, but the central tenets of my platform are that first, we need greater clarity in the funding process. Second, it's imperative that we continue to strengthen the relationship between the Student Budget Advisory Committee and the Student Activity Fee Fund. And third, we need to go in and review and, where necessary, update the funding guidelines so that they can best serve the needs of students today. Because at the end of the day, I see the position of treasurer as having one single mission, and that's to provide clarity and support for student organizations so that they can get the best feasible funding outcome possible. And I believe that with these 3 things, that's more than possible. So look forward to chatting with you all.
Fantastic. So then we move on to our first question, which is, Tim, the treasurer role is intensive, but many students do not know about the process of SBAC or SAFE. How would you go about better educating the student body on these organizations and how they operate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. So I think that the first thing that we really need to address, and this was touched on in the secretary portion as well, but we really need to make sure that the SBAC website is up to date with representatives, important links, important dates, locations of things, because I think that especially now we've seen with, this having been on SOC, but we've seen kind of the chartering process pick back up, and we have a lot of first-time presidents and treasurers who really might not even know where to start with the funding process and what SBAC or SAFE or any of these other things do. So having that kind of central resource for them to be able to go to and find answers and find the process, I think is really step one. And then from there, I would really like to continue a lot of things that we've done this year with workshops and really making myself available to students and making sure that they know who their SBAC rep is, because I feel like when you have a lot of resources and you have all of the opportunities to talk to someone in SBAC, whether that be myself or one of the SBAC reps, I think that's just an amazing opportunity and really helps to get from A to B.
Fantastic. Our next question is, many of the newest student leaders have not had a normal academic year. As treasurer, how do you plan to guide these student leaders through the budgeting process as things return to normalcy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. I think that it starts with number one, just acknowledging that we're going to be looking at kind of an irregular year this year, because obviously we've already seen it when people were applying for budgets this past year, but students organizations might have not had a single member for the past 2 years, and now they're coming back in full force and have 80 members in their organization. So it's a totally different budgeting process, and I think that it's just really providing that support for them and making sure that they have the resources that they need to be able to get funding for if a new person joins the club, or if, hey, we did an event in 2019, we have no idea what the event looked like, how do we even start with funding it now that we're kind of back to normal? I think that providing answers to all of those questions and really getting that support to students is the best way to kind of help them adjust to a more normal atmosphere.
Fantastic. Just one more question for you. What are you most excited about for the coming year as treasurer?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think that for me, I'm really just excited to honestly get back to a normal year, because I think that especially as we've kind of gotten into the latter months of SBAC, it's been really interesting to kind of get to address all of these things and see these organizations start on projects that they've been planning to do before the pandemic and really hadn't had the opportunity, and just getting to see the excitement on people's faces when they get the opportunity to do something like that. I think that's really rewarding, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Fantastic. And with that, if you have a closing statement, we'd love to hear it.
Will do. So I'll keep this short because for time's sake, but I just want to close by emphasizing that I think I've been a dedicated member of student government and SBAC, and I've really worked to try and make both of them the best organizations that can be. And as I've touched on throughout, I think that these experiences, among others, make me really uniquely qualified to take on this task. And if elected, I'm really just looking forward to hitting the ground running and working hard to get students the funding resources they deserve. So hope you'll consider voting for me on Tuesday. Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. With that, I'm going to have Jackson come on up. Brief introduction. Jackson Butler is a sophomore from North Carolina, double majoring in politics, international affairs, and communication. He's been involved with student government since his freshman year, when he served as a senator and as a COVID-19 liaison. In his sophomore year, he served as co-chair of the Campus Life Committee and co-chair of the SAPSA Committee. Thank you, and we'd love to hear your opening statement.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jackson Butler. I'm a sophomore from Raleigh, North Carolina, double majoring in politics, international affairs, and communication, and I'm running to serve as your Speaker of the House for the 2022-2023 academic year. Like Rory said, I currently serve as the co-chair for the Campus Life Committee and for the SAPSA Committee, which stands for Sexual Assault Prevention, Support, and Accountability. In the past, I've served as one of the 2 COVID liaisons and as a senator from Angelou, working on the Campus Life Committee. Before I dive into my platform and what I hope to accomplish next year as your Speaker of the House, I want to describe some of what I've accomplished thus far during my time on student government. As the Campus Life co-chair, along with my wonderful co-chair, Tanya Christou, we worked on getting food trucks to come to campus on a bi-weekly basis to provide food to Wake Forest students for free and stimulate the local economy by working with local vendors and bringing them to campus. Tanya and I worked on planning Mental Health Week, where we had the opportunity to put on 12 amazing events and bring our campus together throughout a really important topic. And I also worked on getting the blackout game for homecoming, which I provided 1,000 free t-shirts to Wake Forest students and worked to bring the largest crowd ever to Wake Forest football stadium during our homecoming game this year. As the co-chair for the SAPSA committee, I led a group of 22 student leaders along with Pilar Agudelo, my co-chair, to advise the university leadership on issues surrounding sexual violence and assisted in the implementation of a university-wide campus climate survey on sexual misconduct that is currently out now. I also have experience talking directly with administrators outside of student government, working on the Campus Life Advisory Committee and on the Capital Project Advisory Committee. So moving past what I've done in the past, let's look at what we're going to do in the future. So my platform is centered around 4 main goals: amplifying student voices, expanding student government involvement, increasing transparency, and strengthening our community. I plan to accomplish these goals through a variety of internal reforms and the continuation of some existing programming. My main policy point that I plan to bring to Senate next year is the implementation of a town hall at the beginning of every Senate meeting. In this case, we would allow students from across campus to line up and listen to their concerns before the start of every meeting to make sure we're getting concerns directly from the students rather than student representation. I would also work with our PR team to provide greater information on the student government website and to community partners like the Old Gold and Black in an effort to provide more information about the day-to-day operations of the Senate. One of the points that I plan to do in this is to bring the minutes to the community by publishing them on the website and on other social media platforms. And I would also encourage and invite university administrators to attend our meetings, as that would be the best way for them to hear what us as students are doing. And finally, I would push for the continuation of essential institutional research as we've done with the Campus Climate Survey as needed. And I look forward to talking to you more about my platform tonight.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. This question feels slightly redundant, but what plans do you have to make student government more productive internally and externally?
Yeah, so
I'm happy to just say it.
So as a speaker, I think one thing that's really, really important is, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, administrator-student relationships. And one thing that I think we can bring to the table as a Speaker of the House is providing partnerships with university administrators in each committee. For example, I would establish a formal partnership between the Vice President for Campus Life and the Campus Life Committee, and so on and so forth, such as the Diversity and Inclusion Committee partnering with the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion here on campus. While of course these partnerships do exist in theory, I think formalizing these partnerships would be a really great way to help push our committee members and our co-chairs forward in working with administrators. I also think it's absolutely beyond essential that we have administrators attending our meetings, and I would encourage them to come along. Beyond that, I also would like to implement the town hall procedure and again, communicate more thoroughly with our community on what we're doing to make sure that it's an open dialogue between both student government and the administrators and the students to make sure that we're all on the same page and working to make Wake a better place each and every day.
Fantastic. Our next question is, how do you plan to engage with the student government president and cabinet?
Yeah, well, I have great relationships with both of the candidates running for president. And as the Speaker of the House, for those of you who do not know, part of the role is to work along with the executive board in forming a cabinet. And one thing that I'm extremely passionate about is ensuring that we have created a cabinet that is reflective of our student body in a diverse manner. So one thing that I'm really, really passionate about and looking forward to doing as your Speaker of the House is creating a diverse representative cabinet to make sure that we are getting people from all over campus as a part of our cabinet and advising the president and the rest of the executive board and the cabinet. Aside from that, I think it's really, really essential to have those meetings with members of exec, whether that be individually or as a group, and I would love to continue doing that as the current exec has done, and I look forward to doing that next year as we move out of COVID and into more of a normal year.
Fantastic. And your final question is, what do you think should be the top 3 priorities for student government to accomplish in this coming year?
Yeah, absolutely. So I touched on this a little bit in my interviews with the OGB and in my opening statement, but I think that the absolute number 1 issue this year going on campus is communication. I've mentioned that I think that every major crisis that we had could have been either averted or made a little bit less bad if we had more thorough communication networks. whether that be with the student government communication, which I think has been fantastic, or with the administrative communication, which I think we should advise on more. I think another really important issue that we need to tackle is as we move out of COVID and into a more normal year, we need someone with experience talking to these administrators on how to move out of this pandemic. As the COVID liaison, I was able to do that, and I would like to continue doing so. And last but not least, I think the Campus Climate Survey evaluation following the data that we collect over these next 2 weeks is going to be absolutely essential, and I look forward to continuing my work as the co-chair of the Campus Climate Committee, SAPSA committee, working on the Campus Climate Survey next year as we are able to look at the results and actually create tangible change on campus when it comes to this topic, which is absolutely essential.
Fantastic. And then finally, you can provide your closing statement.
Well, like Tim, I'm going to keep it nice and short, but if you want to check out my website, it's www.jacksonforspeaker.com, all one word, for more information on my platform. And I would just like to share that voting starts Tuesday the 22nd and closes the 23rd, and I hope you'll consider voting for me. Thank you.
And now, Pilar, if you can hear me, don't mind turning on the screen, phenomenal. And then here as well. So I'll introduce both of our candidates. First, we have Ethan Warner. So Ethan Warner is a junior from Colorado with majors in history and politics and international affairs, as well as a minor in Middle East and South Asian studies. He's been in student government since his freshman year, during which time he has held the positions of a senator, Judiciary Committee co-chair for 2 semesters, and historian for 2 semesters. Next, we have Pilar Agudelo. Pilar Agudelo is a junior from Oregon with a major in politics and international affairs and minors in psychology and global trade and commerce studies. She has been in student government since her freshman year, during which time she has held the positions of senator and diversity and inclusion committee co-chair for 3 semesters. In the fall, she was asked to co-chair the Sexual Assault Prevention Support and Accountability Executive Advisory Committee, or SAPSA. I'm excited to see 2 candidates from 2 of our more Western states. With that, we're going to have both of our candidates open. Pilar, if we could have your opening statement first. The camera is locked on Jess, so I'm gonna.
When she speaks, it'll be fine.
Okay, all right, Pilar, you should be good to go then.
Okay, thank you, Rory, and thank you for that opening bio. As Rory said, my name is Pilar Agudelo, and I'm running for student body president. I'd like to start by apologizing because it is 1 a.m. where I am, and I'm a little sleepy already. But I wanted to quickly go over some of my priorities as candidate for president. I'm centering my platform around 3 main pillars, those being building trust in our community, holding each other accountable, and creating an equitable framework. And the 3 main issues on my platform are mental health, racial justice, and sexual assault prevention. Over the course of the last 3 years at Wake Forest, I've really centered my work around these issues and continue making progress on them. But I'm hoping through the platform of president that I can continue to make change that is even more substantial and really build foundations for students to continue doing this work in the future. I think what's really important about the role of president is that it's not just about doing a lot in a year, but also making sure that there are people who will follow up on the work and also have the unique perspectives and background to bring up that work in the future.
Thank you, Rory. For too long, we in student government have failed you. We claim to represent the student voice here at Wake Forest, but in reality, we have fallen far short of that aim. As president, one of my foremost priorities will be to represent the student voice here at Wake Forest. As we emerge from a deadly pandemic and we finally begin to return toward a state of normalcy, it is imperative that the next president of Wake Forest University is able to chart a course for the future. Now, I am that candidate. My policy platform is defined by one overarching philosophy, and that is putting the forest first. Unless a candidate can put the forest first, all of their policies are null and void. So let me tell you a little bit about my policy platform and how I intend to put the forest first. The first pillar of my platform is related to student engagement. I believe that we have a mission. More than that, I believe that we have a duty to directly engage with the student body. I will accomplish this through my novel constituent outreach program, which is one of the most ambitious reform packages of over 2 decades. The program has the endorsement of Dean Clifford, Dr. Stephanie Carter, and the RA Leadership Council. The program would connect RAs to senators. And in effect, there would be micro constituencies for senators, and those concerns could then be relayed to the Senate. I will also achieve direct student engagement by appointing a series of community liaisons. These community liaisons will report directly to my office, and I will ensure that members of cabinet are aware of their findings. The second pillar of my platform relates to accessibility and inclusion. That means cracking down on ADA violations and making it such that anyone who has a disability on campus can navigate Wake Forest without hardship. But that also means that we should make sure that our technologies are accessible for all students. I believe that one of the legacies of the pandemic will be the increase in online education materials. We need to make sure that that material is well regulated by student government and the administration. That means providing quality captions, good video, making sure that those with learning disabilities and technological disabilities can access online media with ease. I will also make sure to confront interpersonal violence. I've done that in my role as part of the Title IX task force my sophomore year. The next pillar of my platform relates to reforms and initiatives to student government. I will work to empower senators. I will work to foster cross-institutional collaboration from the West Coast to the East Coast. I have good relationships with student body presidents from Stanford University to Washington University in St. Louis to Colorado College. I know what it takes to run a student government, and I can do it as president. Finally, I will advocate for a civic day of service, which would entail a holiday for all students during federal elections. Fourth, I will seek to increase health and wellness by taking a new approach to mental health. As opposed to artificially inflating the supply of our counselors on campus, I believe that mental health woes deserve a multi-layered approach. This involves not only hiring more counselors, but it also involves finding mentors on campus that students can go to when they're stressed or anxious. And it also involves strengthening group therapy and other outlets for support for all students on campus. I will also look to diversify our dining menus, making non-traditional dining options such as vegan, vegetarian, kosher, and halal foods not only more accessible, but more affordable in the process. I will also work to make health products more available to our communities across Winston-Salem. Finally, I will seek to reform the university judicial system by standardizing syllabi language on the Honor Code. As a former member of the Honor Code Task Force, I discovered that over 70% of professors on this campus do not include a single mention of the Honor Code on their syllabus. This needs to be addressed so that student rights are respected. More than that, I will look to standardize faculty referral policies to the judicial liaison and advocate for restorative justice for those who are sanctioned. My platform is defined by my philosophy of putting students first, of putting the forest first. Unless we as a student government reclaim that mantle of leadership and put the forest first, student government will fail to heed the calls of the forest. We must do better, and we will do better under a Werner administration. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we're going to hop into our first question, which is, and again, slightly repetitive on this one, but what are your top priorities for the coming year should you be elected president? We're going to start with Ethan on this one.
Certainly. As I mentioned, and as is part of my campaign, the first priority I would have as president is putting the forest first. As a part of that mission, I will seek to seek direct engagement with students through my significant reform package called the Constituent Outreach Program. I will make sure every student, either on or off campus, has someone they can talk to in student government. There are over 50 members of student government, and the fact that we do not utilize our resources appropriately is damning to our institution. We need to do better, and we will do better. The second of my priorities is accessibility. Accessibility is an issue that often goes under the radar for student government. Those who have legitimate concerns about their rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act don't know where to report those concerns to. I've heard from so many constituents that they've been denied access to the library with their service dog because librarians have an allergy. That is a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. More than that, we need to make sure that new online education is well regulated and is accessible for all students. My third most priority is going to be increasing health and wellness at Wake Forest. I want to make sure mental health resources are accessible. I want to make sure we approach it with a new approach, a multi-layered approach that it deserves. And I also want to make sure that our dining menus are diverse enough to accommodate the needs of a diverse campus. Not everyone consumes the same traditional American food that a lot of students on campus already consume. We need to make sure that dining menus are diverse, affordable, and accessible. And finally, as a part of that pillar, I want to make sure that we're doing more for our local community. We need to escape the wake bubble. As president, I will work with local communities in the Winston-Salem area to ensure that we're addressing things like dental deserts and period poverty where those problems arise, particularly in the northwest part of the state. Thank you.
Pilar?
So as I mentioned previously, the three main centers of my platform are racial justice, mental health, and sexual assault prevention. But I do want to highlight that for me, well, those are priorities. An even bigger issue is how each of these overlap. So in the past, the way that student government has worked is that each committee is assigned issues based on their most relevance. And while that is still applicable, and I still plan to make that applicable, I think one of the biggest issues we have in student government is that we have a lot of cross-contamination and a lack of collaboration. So what happens is campus life may be planning mental health week, but diversity and inclusion is working on issues of racial justice, on issues of accessibility, and things of the sort. And what happens is those two things overlap a lot, and yet we've treated them as divided issues when we shouldn't. And I think my priority, especially starting off in the role of president, is going to be to really reshape cabinet and exec and the Senate to make sure that we have greater collaboration across these issues. Because if we don't address them together, they will continue to not improve or worsen, or we will continue to see the same pattern at Wake that we've seen, at least in my experience, for the last 3 or 4 years.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Our next question is that the president is responsible for voicing the needs of almost 6,000 students in various formal and informal settings. Oftentimes, the president is the only student in the room during contentious and confidential conversations with staff, faculty, and community leaders. How would you represent students in these spaces? Let's go Pilar first.
So it's no easy task, as anyone can imagine, and being a representative for 6,000 students is not simple. The way I would go about it is taking from my experience in the last 3 years. I've been involved in multiple groups across campus. As a resident advisor, I've been an employee on campus. As a student engaged in the Office of Wellbeing, I've met with students across campus. I've been in rooms to teach students. I've been in classes, and taking from each of those experiences and each of my engagements from different students on campus, I can build a better understanding of the student body. But beyond just my background, it's also looking forward and understanding how I can continue to do outreach so that once I'm in a setting where I may be the only student in the room, I can take from those experiences and those conversations that I continue to have. So that may be putting myself in a position where I'm open constantly for student feedback, whether it be through social media and working with the secretary and the PR committee to have those conversations and how I can make myself most accessible to the opinions of the student body so I can elevate those voices, or whether it be sitting myself down in Benson and being like, hi, I'm your student body president. Please come talk to me so that the next time someone asks a question, I know that I can take what you have said and elevate it to the highest level.
Well, with respect, I think this is this is the problem I'm seeking to address in my campaign, which is that student government has historically expected students to come to them with concerns. I don't believe that. I believe that student government should put the onus on itself to gather constituent concerns. As I mentioned, I already have a program that's been approved by Dean Clifford, as well as a number of RAs that would seek to accomplish that. But I also want to talk about my bimodal approach toward gathering constituent concerns. As president, I would have, first and foremost, a trickle-down outreach, if you will. I seek to form good relationships with organization presidents, leaders across campus, so I can get a gauge on what those leaders think are important issues. That mode of engagement is backed up by my constituent outreach program. Such a program will enable me to hear the needs of underclassmen, of those across campus, of those off campus, of those studying abroad. So not only am I engaging with organization leaders, but we're also enabling the Senate to bring the concerns of like-minded students to student government, as well as colleagues, friends, and those who may not typically engage with student government. I will also say that as a voting member on the Online Education Committee, which is a faculty committee for those of you unaware, I've had the distinct privilege of representing students with administration, with faculty. I've taken a very similar approach, which is that whenever I feel like my opinion needs a third-party thought or third-party opinion as well, I look to those organization leaders, those administrators for a third opinion. I will do that as president. I've done it before. I'll do it again. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, so our next question then is, Wake Forest is in a period of significant change and transition. We have a relatively new president and vice president for campus life, and the post-pandemic landscape is always changing. How do you anticipate navigating this period of change in the role of president? I'm gonna have Ethan go first.
Well, first and foremost, we navigate that change with policy, not platitude. I mean this in all respect to Pilar, but I printed out her policy platform in preparation for today's debate, and I could fit it on 2 pages. My policy platform is over 20 pages, and I have a bold vision for the future, not bullet points. But more than that, I think, as I've already established, that there are pillars to my policy which specifically guide Wake Forest toward the future. It's not just the mainstream issues we hear in student government. It's not just about mental health or sexual assault or sexual misconduct. And those issues are important. There are a number of issues the president must bring to their office every single day. The president must be able to chart an uncertain future with a diverse policy menu. I have that as a part of my campaign, and I will continue to do that next year.
I first want to say I appreciate Ethan's critique of my platform. I do want to clarify that despite it not being 20 pages long, the reason that it is the length that it is because of the uncertainty of the future. As we have seen since the first day I entered Wake Forest as a freshman, every semester there has been a new situation, a new conflict, a new issue. Every week is a new week. We've seen the first month this semester, even abroad, I felt the wave of stress and panic of the student body. And I think that is why I chose the 3 pillars that I chose in my platform, specifically the values that I hold in trust, accountability, and equity. They're to framework my policy moving forward, both preemptively and in response to things that occur. I think when you're in a transition period, it is very difficult to say what may or may not happen, and dealing with what ifs means you get stuck in a place where you can't affect change on campus. And so instead, I think holding the values that I do and holding the values that I've reflected in the student body having will help shape those changes. I also think it's an understatement to say that we've been in a transition period in the last year. Wake has been in a transition period for quite a while now. I would argue at least the last 5 years. Despite just recently getting a new president, we've had multiple staff changes, faculty changes, director position changes since I arrived at Wake. And I think one of the biggest issues we've had is that all of these different positions either communicate with each other, fail to communicate with us, the students, fail to communicate upwards to leadership. And as someone who's worked with faculty, staff, and multiple working groups and staff committee meetings, I've noticed that there's a lack of information that is spread across those groups. And I think one of my priorities is to make sure that that communication is abundantly clear moving forward and does not fall to slack from excuses of being in transition, because we've been in transition for a really long time, and it's no longer an excuse to use when we're talking about transparency to the student body.
I respond to that briefly.
No.
I'll get it in closing.
Just to keep things rolling. And also because we're moving into the individual question section for this. This is something unique to the president. We have written 2 questions, one for Pilar, one for Ethan, based on their policy platforms. We will start with Pilar. Pilar, in your time in student government, you've been a vocal advocate for sexual assault prevention. How would your experience with this topic prepare you to be president, and what work in this area would you plan to continue as president if elected?
I've spoken about this extensively in my platform as well as with students across campus, but I've been engaged with sexual health issues as well as sexual assault prevention since high school. I work with Planned Parenthood. I've been trained countless times on trauma response and sexual assault response. It is not an easy role to be in ever, to be the person that people come to speak to about these issues, much less to be the person in that situation or to be a survivor of sexual assault. And so that's why for me, it's always been such a big priority. I think moving forward and how I will prioritize this as president and how I will take what I have done over the last few years, even before arriving at WIG, is one, starting with the campus climate survey. I know we've heard it a lot today, and I'm sure we've heard it over the last week all over social media quite a bit. So I don't want to go too extensive into it. But I think one of the big issues with surveys on campus is that there's a lot of mistrust in the effectiveness of doing those surveys. And so while I stand that this survey is extremely important to the Wake Forest community, I also know that the student body is putting the trust in me, in the SAFSA committee, and student government and the administration to actually take action with this survey. And I think my priority will be to make sure that that happens, on top of the fact that I want to prioritize the intersectional lens when doing the work, because what happens is a lot of marginalized voices on campus get overrun or ignored, or really just, becomes this conversation of making sure that those voices are elevated consistently throughout this conversation, because what we don't want is what happened last semester, and having an entire group of students be treated so terribly on campus, despite the valid concerns of sexual assault on campus. And so I think for me, a big priority is really ensuring that the administration is holding those perspectives when they do this work, because we don't want that to happen again, and we never want to see it happen on campus.
Thank you, Pilar. Now, Ethan, your question. In your platform, you dedicate significant time to the issue of increasing student government engagement with the student body. In what ways do you think student government has fallen short in this area? And can you expand a little bit more on your plan to address this if elected president?
Absolutely. So for those of you who don't know, I'm actually currently serving as the student government historian. And in that capacity, I've had the unique opportunity to read through some of our old student government records. So you'll often find me at ZSR on a Friday, looking through dusty dustbins and archives, looking for clues about our past in student government. And what I've discovered through that process as historian is that student government was once much more integrated with the Wake Forest community than we are now. In fact, back in the 1960s, student government would actually meet in Wake Chapel, and students would come and voice their concerns about funding or judicial decisions or campus events. And in that sense, the Wake Forest student government was actually the heart of the campus community. By the 1990s, this integration began to fade. Increasingly, student government responsibilities and privileges were outsourced to different agencies in various capacities. As a result, student government lost its place as the heart of campus. As president, I want to fix that. As I've already mentioned several times tonight, one of the ways I plan to address the direct engagement deficit we currently see in student government is through my constituent outreach program. To elaborate a little bit more on what this would entail, senators would be assigned to specific RAs in coordination with the Speaker of the House and the Office of President's Life and Housing. This would enable senators to represent roughly 20 or 30 students during Senate meetings. And it would also enable RAs to voice their concerns to Senate, particularly given the treatment they faced last year. I would know, I was one of them. I also want to elaborate a little bit more on my policy to introduce community liaisons to the office of the president. I feel it particularly important as a part of my trickle-down outreach model that the president be able to engage with a diverse set of voices on campus. As president, I would appoint a number of community liaisons to keep me informed on what's happening around campus and far beyond it. Some of the liaisons I would appoint would be a diversity, equity, and inclusion liaison, a domestic student policy liaison, an international student policy liaison, a resident advisor liaison, and a student athletics liaison. For me, I feel that these liaisons target very important groups on campus, and groups which traditionally have not had their voices heard by student government. As president, I want to make sure that their concerns, their ideas, and their feedback get to my desk. I make it a high priority of mine that both of these programs are accomplished. Thank you.
Fantastic. So with that, we're going to move into audience questions. If there is anyone in the audience who has a question, raise your hand. Good Lord. We will start. I guess I saw your hand first, Jackson, so we can start with you.
Yeah, so this question goes to Ethan. The most central pillar of your platform that you've mentioned over and over again tonight is the constituent outreach program, which I would note failed in Senate twice, the second time being as recent as just last Tuesday with 7 yeses, 27 noes, which is 25%. How do you plan on installing this as part of your central platform if it's something that the Senate doesn't approve of?
Well, thank you for that question, Jackson. I would just note that the first version of the constituent outreach program was based on a different model that I discovered during my time as historian. I think some valid concerns were raised about the program, and ultimately it was tabled and did not fail, and was referred back to the Public Relations Committee, where I continued to develop and work on the program. I reintroduced the bill on Tuesday after speaking with the RA Leadership Council, Dean Clifford of the Office of Residence, Life, and Housing, as well as Dr. Stephanie Carter. I received the complete endorsement of that group of people for the legislation. I would note that the reason that the updated constituent outreach program failed to pass Senate is mainly because there were concerns that not enough RAs had been consulted on the specifics and particulars of this program. As I revisit this program, and I will revisit it and hope to reintroduce it, I seek to better consult RAs on the particulars of the legislation, despite the fact that I believe I had done that the second time around. But I will make sure that all RAs on campus know about this program and are comfortable going forward. I will also note the constituent outreach program, there were a couple of concerns about the workload this would involve for RAs. But as I mentioned repeatedly in Senate, and as you well know, Jackson, this program would basically just be a continuation of existing practice. RAs are already tasked with making intentional connections once a month with their residents. It would basically just pair them with student government senators. I feel very confident this program will pass, and even if it doesn't pass, I am well known within student government for coming up with new and novel ideas. I will certainly do that as president.
Thank you, Jackson. I think, do we have a question for either Pilar or for both candidates?
Yeah, Connor Metzger, OGB. Both of you touched on.
Can you speak up just a little bit more, just because? Yeah. Why don't you hop on?
Hi, I'm with the OGB. Just a couple. I got a question about the UCC specifically.
You gotta get up a little bit more. These speakers. This is darn tech.
Yeah. So I have a question about the UCC. Both of you mentioned it in your policies that you sent to the OGB and also during the debate tonight, but it has been a consistent issue with the changes that were made last year, which would ultimately end up, they said, was a miscommunication. What is your approach, though, to bettering the UCC, either that be telehealth, which I know, Ethan, you mentioned in your platform, or hiring more counselors? What is your approach to bettering it or increasing communication so students know what exactly is going on at the UCC?
We'll take that one first.
Yeah, I'll take it first. Well, thank you for mentioning that, Connor. I'm actually very proud of my record on telehealth. Last year, I introduced legislation to liberalize interstate licensure requirements for counselors within a particular state. What that resolution sought to achieve is it would make it such that we could have telehealth services across state lines. I'm going to continue to advocate for that program as president. I'll also touch a little bit on my approach to mental health on campus. I am not particularly persuaded by the argument that by artificially inflating the supply of counselors in the UCC, that we are going to solve the mental health crisis on campus. According to research, and I have the data with me here, over the last decade, particularly from 2007 to 2017, students who were attending college in 2007, only 19% of them used university counseling services. By 2017, that increased to 34%. That is a marked difference. Demand is as high as it has ever been for university counseling services. Now, to be sure, I do want to make sure that we have enough staff who can appreciate the mental health concerns of students. If you look at my policy document, I cite a particular standard, which I will stand by as president. I want to make sure the ratio of counselors to students is in alignment with the International Accreditation of Counseling Services. Currently, by my best estimates, the ratio is 1 counselor for every 879 students. As president, I would seek to reduce that ratio to 1 for every 650 students. But more than that, I think that we should take a new approach to mental health, because this is an unprecedented problem and we need novel solutions. So what I think we have to do is tackle this problem with a multi-layered approach. Not only would I advocate for more counselors on staff at the UCC, but I will also advocate for more group therapy, greater use of faculty fellows, and the ability for students on campus to find mentors who they can talk about their stress and anxiety with. Ultimately, we have to ask ourselves, when is clinical intervention appropriate? And in my view, demand is simply too high to continue this policy of artificially inflating supply of counselors. I think we need new approaches, and I think those approaches will work. They've been proven to work by several studies, and you can find those in my policy document. But as I mentioned, it's an unprecedented situation. We need new solutions, and as president, I will bring those solutions to the forefront.
Thank you. Pilar?
First, I want to say thank you very much for this question. It really highlights something really important to me. I think one of the biggest issues that I have found, and it's very difficult while abroad because timely care was just introduced at the end of last semester, but based on, for example, the OGB article on timely care, as well as personal accounts of people's experiences with timely care, telehealth services have been falling short for students, whether it be because of accessibility or lack of connection with a counselor. I think while telehealth helps increase accessibility for some students, it falls short for a lot of students. And I think that is a limitation that people may have not accounted for and we need to account for now. And so in terms of discussing how we move forward with the UCC and the restructuring of it, speaking directly to the new director, Dr. Mann, will be a key priority for me, as well as considering how we can reform mental health on campus. One of our biggest issues is retention of counselors. So while increasing staffing is important, it does not address the issue that after a year or 2 years, we have counselors who leave and come in, and then they leave again and they come back. And we have new counselors and old counselors, and it's constantly in transition, which means that there is no stability in the UCC. And when there's no stability in the UCC, you have no opportunity for contracting out. You have no opportunity for considering how we can increase staffing over time to address more students and increasing the ratio that Ethan was talking about. And a lot of the reason for that, and this is because of personal conversations I've had with staff on campus, is because the environment at Wake Forest is a difficult environment to work in. And when you're constantly overburdening counselors, they no longer choose to stay at Wake Forest and be an employee here. And so I think one of the biggest issues is addressing how we can make this a better workplace environment and therefore be better at directly serving our students. As a student employee, I have seen this firsthand, being an RA, being a Wake Forest volleyball student manager. Sometimes the work environment at Wake is not the greatest, and that means that the retention rate for employees goes down. And then again, we fail to serve the student body. And so I think for me, that's one of the biggest priorities is talking to Dr. Mann and talking to other people at Wake in high level staffing positions about how we can encourage a better environment for them to work in and want to be at Wake and want to help students.
Fantastic. We have something on Instagram that seems particularly pithy.
We can go to the audience first if you want another one, or
Does anyone in the audience have a question? It's going to be a question. It's going to keep us here for 35 minutes. Jim. You want to go?
So this is for Ethan. What involvement besides student government do you currently have that connects you with other populations of the Wake student body?
Sure. So I think one of my proudest involvements in my time at Wake is being a resident advisor. In that capacity, I've had the unique opportunity to engage with students from a variety of different backgrounds, be it student athletes, international students, or what have you. As I previously mentioned, I was also on the Title IX task force. It allowed me the opportunity to better advocate for students who had been the victims of sexual misconduct. I'm also currently on the online education committee, and as I previously mentioned, it allows me to advocate for students with technological disabilities. When we specifically when we look at the use of third-party software in our education, how that affects their learning more broadly. More than that, I was also a member of the Honor Code Task Force, which, again, as I would emphasize, it allowed me to bring in fresh perspective to the administration when I was giving them my thoughts on judicial reform. I was also a member of the Honor and Ethics Council, so I got to meet a lot of different students with different needs and concerns. I'd hear from students who had, for example, when I was on that panel, I'd hear from students who just went through a very heavy mental health crisis, and I had to weigh whether or not there should be, what the sanction would be for those students who had just gone through that crisis. When I was on that panel, I also got to hear from students who had just gone through a move or had just traveled abroad and were struggling with COVID. I've heard from a lot of students on campus. I've heard their concerns in a variety of capacities. As president, I bring that experience every single day.
We'll do, I guess, one last audience question if you still want to ask, or did we?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Ethan, you talk a lot about like a liaison program, a constituent outreach program, and all of these programs enlist people that are on student government. But how do you intend to be more personal? Because I feel like when I think of a president, when my constituents think of a president, they think of someone who's accessible and, you know, that has that transparency with them. So how are you going to make your presidency, if elected, personable instead of just sending out people into the community to communicate to you what other people want?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, Melissa. And just to clarify, you know, I'm not sending out senators to the field to be my lackeys. I am going to be out there looking for constituent concerns as well. I've done that quite a bit throughout this campaign. I've met with over 500 students. I've talked to them and heard their concerns. I've spoken with them face to face. As president, I'll be out there looking for student concerns, making sure my voice is heard in the community. And granted, I am a bit more of an introvert, so I tend to find myself cuddle up on a Friday watching some new show or reading a book, but that's not going to prevent me as president from executing the duties of my office. And that's going to be going out to the field, hearing from students, hearing what they have to say, being on the front lines of crisis when they come up. As president, I will be there for our students and for our community.
All right, we're gonna switch over to the Gram.
Yes. We have a question for Pilar, and it says, how have you listened to student concerns and interests in the past, and how has this influenced your platform and plans if elected?
Thank you for the question. So as diversity and inclusion co-chair, it differs from a lot of the other co-chair positions because a lot of the work we do isn't necessarily as tangible. For example, physical planning deals with physical aspects of campus. Campus life deals with like planning of events, Mental Health Week, notably, so on and so forth. I think because of that, it is very relational. You are constantly talking to students about really difficult experiences, most often on campus, which means every single one of those conversations, and I won't go into details out of respect for people who have spoken to me personally, every single one of those relationships that I built, every single one of those conversations, I take with me as I move forward, not just in the coming year as potential president of the student body, but beyond that in my future career, in my future life, and really valuing each of those words that people have spoken to me. Similar to Ethan, I've been a resident advisor, and that includes 2 years of being an RA, which is at least 80 residents, not to mention the residents in my entire building, which equals 400 students over 2 years. So those numbers have exponentially grown. The people I've met through those roles continue to grow. The student athletes I've had conversations with as the volleyball manager, these are people who like I hold dear to me, and the relationships I build at Wake are relationships that I hold dear to me, and I take their words very seriously. And so I continue to bring them with me every step of the way. But I think like that for me is just really important, is those relationships.
Awesome. With that, I think I am going to begin winding this sucker down. So as we end, I just want to say each candidate again may choose to either give a closing statement or ask their opposition a question. Again, I ask that you keep these one or the other. We will start with Ethan.
Thanks, Roy. I'll be giving a closing statement. Well, folks, since the spring of 2019, Wake Forest has been in basically what we would describe as an existential crisis. We've had COVID-19 to deal with. We've had ICE directives. We've had RA walkouts. We've had student protests. And even recently, we've had a fertilizer fire of all things. Most geeks have never enjoyed the fruits of a normal campus life. As we begin to transition back to a state of normalcy, it is especially important that we have a president who is capable of guiding the university through a rebuilding process. We are at a unique juncture in student government history. The next student body president must be capable of helping Deeks rebuild strong. As we transition back to a new state of normal, we need a president who can put the forest first. As a 3-year veteran in student government, I've come to realize that our greatest failure is in our inability to engage with students directly. I'm running a campaign to put the student back in student governments and to restore the body politic. We as a student government have failed to put students first. To restore and rebuild campus, we need a president who can put the forest first. I am that candidate. My policy platform is comprehensive and it is unique. I not only address the issues that Pilar raises, but I go beyond that and I advance concrete strategies on how to combat them. From accessibility, inclusion, sustainability, to student engagement and internal reforms, I offer the most comprehensive vision for the future. If you want a president who will put students first and can chart a vision for the future, look no further. On March 22nd, vote to put the forest first and vote Ethan for student body president. Thank you.
Pilar?
I just wanted to say thank you everyone for being here tonight. I know that the Sunday scaries can be a lot sometimes, so I really appreciate each of you taking time out of your days to be here. I know for me it's late and I'm tired, so I will keep this brief. All I really want to say is that if you have any more questions that I didn't answer tonight, I'm always open to another conversation, whether you want to set up a time to call or email me or find me on social media or on my website. There's a contact link. You're free to use any of those to reach out to me if you have any follow-up questions. If not, great. And finally, I hope you'll consider voting for Pilar for president on March 22nd. Thank you.
Our 2 candidates. All right, it's over. You can go.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you candidates. See y'all.